So hi and good afternoon to everyone. And I have to say that normally opening any panel, I would say how wonderful it is to be here, but specifically today, looking around here at PLANETech World, seeing how many people have come locally, globally, that are part of the Israeli, either part of or engaging with the Israeli, the growing Israeli climate tech ecosystem, is just very exciting. I'm awestruck and it's actually mind-boggling. It is amazing because I think, as Hanan said, a year ago, something like this would not have happened, and to see the growing ecosystem is just absolutely amazing. So back to our panel, sorry. So our panel, our title is Carbon Accounting, Carbon Trading. We can throw in a little bit of carbon maths. And really we have a medley of topics that all of them are relating to some aspects of carbon and quantification. But really the underlying theme that we'll talk about today on stage, in a minute I'll introduce my panelists, okay, is that we conduct the mathematics to support decision-making. It's decision-making on strategy, innovation pathways, mitigation measures. So it's really so important in building and deciding on the roadmap towards decarbonization. And this is really what we'll touch upon together. It's the power of numbers, the power to make informed decisions and to drive change, and making sure we have the right numbers and that we're using them correctly and putting them to good use when considering systems and changes at scale. So great you're all here. As introduced, I'm Tamar Moise. I head the climate programs at PLANETech, and I'm really, really excited to have three very renowned experts in the carbon space here with me on stage. So I'd like to introduce first, we have Irena Ben Yakar, a partner at Deloitte, ESG Services Lead and Chief Purpose Officer. Professor Francesco Pomponi, Sustainability Science Professor at Napier, Edinburgh, and also at Cambridge, and also Head of Carbon Maths at Extantia. And we have Markus Laubscher, the Global Director of Circular Economy and Regeneration at Orbia Ventures. So I'm sure we're going to get great insights from the three of you in this conversation, and I'm really excited to kick off. So Markus, I thought perhaps we'd begin with you. You can give a little introduction also to yourself and to Orbia, and give us a brief introduction into the current momentum of corporates in addressing carbon mitigation in general and around their own operations.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for organizing this. It's really a great event. So kudos for all the people who have been involved. I have to apologize. I've been speaking so much yesterday evening and today that I'm losing my voice. So I hope it will be enough for the panel. So happy to be there. Markus Laubscher. I'm with Orbia. Orbia is a corporate multinational active all over the globe with about 9 billion revenues, 22,000 employees. For the Israelis here, you probably know the company Netafim, which is part of our group, but we are active in other groups as well, in other domains, in infrastructure and materials. Now, let's go and take a step back. Carbon accounting, where are we? Obviously, there is not enough being done. We are far from where we need to be. We are not on track for our 1.5 degree Paris Agreement. We have the Climate Week happening right now in New York to heighten our ambitions as a global society. But you know, there is still too much talk and not enough action. So you know, it is moving away from the early adopters and into the majority now of companies and organizations to make commitments and start acting. And I'm really happy to see that many companies, especially the multinational companies, have now set global targets and reduction targets for their Scope 1 and 2 emissions. Orbia is one of those as well. We have a science-based target aligned goal of reducing our emissions. To give you the numbers, in case you don't know the concreteness of things, we're talking about 50 billion CO2 equivalent tons per year that need to go to zero. You know, our company has a small scale of this, but we all need to push things together so that we add up. So for us, it's 2 million tons that we have pledged to reduce to 1 million over the next years until 2030. We're well on track, but we need everybody to pitch in, and we need a lot of new technologies to make this happen. So the scale is huge, the momentum is starting to increase, but there is way more that needs to be done.
Okay, thanks, Markus. So we heard from you a little bit about the voluntary commitments of corporates and businesses. We have also voluntary commitments from municipalities. But Irena, I thought over to you. First of all, also be happy for you to give a little introduction to yourself and what you do. And I know that you work with corporates on carbon accounting, setting targets. So following on what we heard from Markus around voluntary commitments, it would be interesting also if afterwards you can tell us about the upcoming regulations, both in the EU and the US, where there's requirements for detailed disclosures around greenhouse gas emissions, around climate risks, and how you think this is going to sort of impact the companies, the trade in that market. And also, how do you envision corporate sort of their activities 10, 20 years down the road? I mean, is regulations the way that we're going to get to scaling?
Thank you, Tamar. It's very nice being here today. I am leading the ESG services in Deloitte Israel and also being a Chief Purpose Officer of Deloitte Israel. And this means that we are putting our money where our mouth is. And we try to be also example in what we expect of our clients to do. So this is really my role to combine those, to make commitments on the level of our organization. And you know, when we come to those corporates and we try to really move them from where they are and to better climate performance, to lower carbon footprint, we want to also be an example for them. So getting to your question about the regulations, I think that the main failure of the market was in lack of disclosure, and especially in a non-common disclosure. So I mean that those companies that voluntarily reported on their emissions did that. There was no enforcement on that. Nobody has ever placed focus on how much does it cost, and no carbon accounting was in place. So what happens now in the EU and the US simultaneously is that draft regulations on both climate risks and GHG emissions went draft this year, and they are supposed to be finalized by the end of this year. That will require every public company on the US market and also in the EU markets to report very detailed information about two main things. One is the impact of climate risks on the organization, including how much does it cost to the organization, or will it cost to the organization, and how it impacts its business strategy and its operation in the future years. And the second part is to report on their GHG emissions according to the protocols and the relevant regulations, and to make this reporting as common and as comparable as possible, including the requirement to have this audited by an expert and included in the financial statements. So this will come into force. We're expecting this to be a requirement to every public company that of certain scale and more in the US market and the EU, starting from 2024. I think this is really important, and looking forward on your question of whether the regulation is an answer. I think that it is an important start, because with no regulation, there is we're not even close to being able for the investors and for the public to compare between the companies and to really take into account what are their carbon footprint, and this is in addition to how how good are the financial performance.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think it's true. We know that when you begin reporting and disclosing, you need that in order to have the actions that to follow. So yeah, hopefully the targets and mitigation actions will also follow. And as Markus, as you mentioned, in order to mitigate, we need a lot of innovation. And that leads me to you, Francesco. Happy for you to introduce yourself, but I'll say ahead that you are involved obviously in quantification of climate impacts, of climate potential for innovations. And I know you also have a very interesting concept around the concept of a carbon payback period. So it would be really nice if you could tell us a bit about what you do, about this concept, and also perhaps share some examples with us.
Sure thing. Am I coming through all right? You hear me? Good. First of all, it's amazing. Doesn't matter the audience, walks of life, professional background, feels like being in class. The first 2 rows, always empty. No one ever sits to the front. But remember, the climate crisis requires collaboration, yeah? So if someone is standing and it's interesting in this session, please sit down, don't be shy. I do a couple of things in life. One is being a full professor in the UK, in Edinburgh and Cambridge. I spent the past 12 years working on something called life cycle assessment, which is a quantitative way of measuring sustainability. Let's put it this way. So we look at products, services, technologies from a whole life perspective. So from cradle to grave, from when something is born, including the materials that are needed, how do you manufacture products, where are they coming from, how do you transport them, and then the useful life, and what happens when they reach the end of that useful life and you need to get rid of them. So this is quite complex because it requires a lot of historic data and a lot of future data. But it's also very important that we do it this way, otherwise we get a partial way. And this is linked to the concept of carbon payback period. Yeah, we're kind of interested when it comes to economics, the payback period. We want to know when our money will be given back to us, yeah, or when an investment will pay itself back. And it's equally important for the carbon, especially in a startup environment, because a startup by nature needs to scale up. And as it scales up, it will incur carbon emissions. There's no way of avoiding this, yeah? We have loads of startups that are working in the sustainability space, but as soon as you start building your first plant and you sell more units and you incur more logistics, you emit carbon. So you're a carbon polluter to start with, yeah? Awesome. We need to ensure that very quickly you are at that level of actually turning the tide and being able to displace loads of more polluting services or more polluting products. And when you are displacing enough of them to have repaid your own carbon emissions, that's when we break even for carbon. So it's still a U-shaped, and what we need to do is ensuring that it's as quick as possible. Can I ask how many years we have to turn the tide in the climate crisis? How many years have we got left? Some numbers? 1 year, I would agree. Some optimists say 7. 7 is very, very optimistic. I would say 3 to 4. Yeah, it's a very short window of operation. So, you know, with money, it's about risk-taking. It's a personal thing, yeah? It's an abstract concept. With the planet, there's less subjectivity involved. So we need to kind of shorten that. So startups need to scale super quickly, and they need to start displacing, you know, traditional products that are relying on fossil fuels equally quickly. And how do we do that? Capital. So it's very important that there is this massive capital shifting in investment.
Thanks very much. That's really interesting hearing about sort of the time dependence and the time scales for assessing climate impact potential. And that also leads, I think, into our next discussion. Also, when we're looking at sort of the time-dependent value of short-term or long-term solutions when we're looking at the space of carbon removal and carbon credits. Because we know that not all carbon is created equal, and this is both in reference to sort of permanence of our carbon sequestration and also in reference to the time to scale up and to start the sequestration. This leads me again back to you, Markus. I'd like to ask you a little bit about Orbia's current policy on carbon credits, on offsettings, and the goals that you're pushing through through your investments, through the venture arm, for investments in this domain.
Yeah, thank you so much. So maybe I should put one thing in front here. We, as Orbia, we have industrial facilities, and I mentioned, 2 million tons of CO2 emissions annually. But we also have a venture arm, and we have a number of colleagues here today who are part of Orbia Ventures to see how we can invest into strategic startups that can help to accelerate the transition. So first, maybe talk about the corporate operations. The activity here is very clear, and it has been ongoing, and it needs to accelerate. It's about reducing those emissions by energy efficiency measures, by moving to other energy sources, by electrification. We have been very actively looking into, investing into renewable energy projects to diversify our sourcing of electricity, but also looking into hydrogen generation to see how we can displace our natural gas. Obviously, all the coal that we have been using in the past, has been phased out, so that we continuously stay on that trajectory to halve our emissions by 2030. Now, there are, in the life of a business, there are ups and downs that you can in very much difficulty foresee. If demand goes up or down, or energy prices go up or down. So, in the case that we don't meet our annual targets, we have now let's say, the last resort of investing into renewable energy credits, RECs, to push our Scope 2 emissions down. So this is what we're doing as a last resort if our other measures haven't met the target that we set annually to reach our long-term target. Now, the question that you're asking is about carbon credits, and there are a lot of people who confuse a number of these things, and maybe Irena can give us a bit more detail on this, but RECs, that I mentioned, are not carbon credits, right? It's not the same thing. Carbon credits for us is still a domain that we need to explore further, because we have been subscribing to the Science Based Target Initiative, and there is a clear guideline from that consortium that the investments and the activities of a company should really happen in its own operations and in its own supply chain to reduce the emissions. Carbon credits are discouraged as a way to avoid companies just to paying their way out of carbon emissions. And we see that and we respect that, and for the time being, what we try to do is see how we can invest into our supply chain next to our own operations, and we at this point do not purchase carbon credits. But we are very actively looking at this market because we believe that it will further develop. The voluntary carbon market has crossed the 1 billion mark last year, and we see it both as a way to help organizations reduce their emissions going forward, but more so invest into new technologies and into new ways to help customers, help suppliers to reduce their carbon emissions. So what we do to support these activities is, through our venture arm, actively look into startups that develop technologies and approaches that help to decarbonize and that help to make the voluntary carbon market a more viable and a more transparent market. So into today's market, you hear a lot of question marks and a lot of criticism on the voluntary carbon market because there are scandals, there's misuse, and it needs just a few bad examples to destroy the trust and the faith in such a market. So where we feel the most action is needed today in the carbon market is really in the measurement and verification space, to make sure that there is complete trust and transparency on those credits. And we believe that that will really boost the market and will stabilize the prices. And that's where we look into. So startups, and there are a number of them here as well, today, that work on this space is something that we feel very passionate about.
If I can chip in on that, there's two things I would like to say on carbon credits. First of all, there's not going to be enough for everyone. So the reason why I'm really excited to work with Extantia is because they want really to focus on deep decarbonization at scale for things that matter. And that's the hard-to-abate sector. So if you think about cement, steel, you know, heating in general, that's really problematic. So we need to find hardware solutions there because carbon credits are not going to be sufficient. The other thing linked to carbon credits is also the quality of the credit itself. So trees are amazing. I'm a super nature lover, but the problem is that trees can die. And if they die, they can rot and release a little bit of the carbon. If they burn, they release the whole of the carbon. When we plant trees, very few people think about it, but there is a soil disturbance. So when you start planting activities, initially there's a spike in carbon emissions, and then the baby trees are not very efficient. So trees take a long time in order to be effective at sucking carbon out of the air. Yes, we can plant lots of trees, billions of trees. Nevertheless, it'll take a lot of time, even for billions of trees, because we have thousands of billions of tons, thousands of gigatons in the atmosphere for the damage we've done that needs to be undone. And for instance, one of the portfolio companies in Extantia is called B0, and what they've done, they brought a layered approach into what is now a binary market in voluntary carbon credits. So at the moment, you have a credit that is either verified, which is thumbs up, or unverified, dodgy, thumbs down. But the problem is that the verified has a very flawed assumption, which is that credit will be equal to 1 ton of carbon. So if you do your carbon accounting and you say, oh, I've emitted 1 ton, I'll buy 1 credit, plus 1, minus 1, 0. Works superbly well in Excel. The problem is that by 2050, we might have perfectly balanced Excel spreadsheets and still parts per million rising or not where they need to be in the atmosphere. So with this company, the idea that they had is to use a layered approach and using a credit as the probability that the credit will turn into 1 ton. And the highest ranking is 0.9, so it's 9%. So the reason certainty that the credit will turn into 1 ton, because we never know if it's certain. Yeah, it's going to be in the future. So the future by nature is uncertain. And if we start embedding this sort of science-based approach to the decision-making that we have to do, linked to the climate crisis, I think we'll, if science acts quickly enough, and if more funds relies on science to help guide in the decision, then we have a chance of acting quick enough with better actions in order to make it.
Great. So I'm just thinking how this links into before when we were talking about scaling on the one hand of sort of carbon mitigation targets and measurements, and the fact that we need to scale, or it is happening, this scaling of the carbon market, but how important it is to have this transparency and this example, say, of ranking, which really allows us to better assess this whole issue of not all carbon being equal. So I'm thinking trees, I'm thinking of forests, and that takes me back to thinking that in the end, these carbon options for removal is actually a lot more than just carbon removal per se. When we're talking about trees, we're talking about a whole ecosystem. We're talking about soil health, we're talking about biodiversity, we're talking about livelihoods. So we're really looking at a system, and we sometimes need to look and take a systems approach in general, and not just to look at one specific item within it. And that leads me back to you again, Francesco, and I want to talk to you that you can tell us a little bit more about your systems approach when you evaluate and quantify climate impacts.
Absolutely, and thanks for the question because it's really close to my heart. So first, actually it's the first grant that I wrote and also the first grant that I won, so it was a successful start. The title was Getting the Numbers Right and Getting the Right Numbers. Of course, to ensure that the reviewers will find it interesting, give me the money, but what I actually meant is that it's important to understand the scale when we want to measure sustainability. So one example of getting the numbers right is if we're focused on a technology, let's say direct air capture. Do you know what direct air capture is? If you don't know, raise your hand. I teach for a living. Perfect. So it's sucking carbon out of the atmosphere. Yeah, we have these giant fans, they suck the air, we keep the carbon, we release the rest, and we say it's permanent sequestration. Fine. So getting the numbers right at small scale means ensuring that we understand the materials that are needed in a direct air capture plant so that we can if you go back to the carbon payback period that I mentioned before, we can understand what is the amount of emissions that the direct air capture plant is responsible for before it starts doing the benefit of sucking carbon out of the air. So focus, one unit, getting the right numbers. Getting numbers right is also, sorry, getting numbers right. Getting the right numbers is actually ensuring that we also go and look at a bigger picture, because one unit is beautiful, yeah? So we work on DAC, we focus on it. Efficiency can be super high, up to 90%, average 75 to 80. So 80% of the carbon is actually a net positive effect. But if we scale up DAC globally, we run out of the word energy. So when we do the big picture, we realize that DAC is not a solution that can solve the problem in its entirety. And that's why we need other solutions to work along DAC, so that DAC remains, you know, something that adds on top. So combining this small scale in order to understand the technology and ensuring that we understand it to do a right carbon accounting, but also scaling it back, yeah? Because at the unitary level, we lose the bigger picture. And I think this is super important. Otherwise, we keep hearing loads of claims of silver bullets, things that might save the planet, and none will work. I've never seen so far one technology that when I check the claim and I scale it back up to the scale of the challenge, stands. All of them fail. They run out of water, they run out of land, they run out of trees, they run out of energy, they run out of something. Rare earth material. So there is not going to be a silver bullet.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Francesco, I might have one that might add up. It won't solve the total problem, but just to showcase some of the stuff that we're doing. If you think about rice production, that's being done with paddy fields in most of the places, and that is a huge emission of methane. The equivalent of that methane emission is the total aviation sector. All right. Now, Netafim has developed a way to irrigate rice and not do drip irrigation, not do paddy fields, but do drip irrigation, and it eliminates completely the methane emissions. Now, we are in the process now with a grower in Italy to go through the Vera accreditation and get it all certified. But if you can shift the total rice production to drip irrigation, well, you have some more plastic that needs to be done. You need some more energy to pump things. But I would love to do the numbers with you. I think it will stack up.
I'm sure it will. Otherwise, you would have not invested. But let's do the assessment. And one thing that is kind of dear to me, because being a scientist, I really can avoid worrying too much about what I say. Yeah, that's the beauty of being a professor. You can say what you want. We don't always need new stuff. There's a lot of potential for reuse in this world. Yeah. There's a paper in Nature from a couple of years ago that the amount of man-made stuff, human-made stuff, has exceeded the amount of biomass in this planet. Yeah, so the stuff that we produced is more than the living organisms. If you think about it, it's absolutely insane. Yeah, so surely there are solutions that can work within what we have. Not everything needs to start from new, and this goes back to that idea of looking at a bigger picture. So if there is a solution that rather than requiring a full new supply chain, full new production line, can reuse what already exists, even if it comes from the bad guys, that's okay. So if geothermal energy can do something by reusing the infrastructure of the fossil fuel industry, thumbs up, yeah? We need to ensure that the conversation happens rather than just being very sentimental and labeling bad guys and good guys. We know who the bad guys are, but if they got some assets that can be useful to accelerate the transition to something better, let's talk.
Well,
and I would not call them bad guys. I would talk about the bad industries, because all the guys I know, they're really good guys and they try to move things around.
So I really like that concept of thinking about the bad industries, because we want the industries to transform and we need what's behind them. If we talk energy power, we obviously need to get it, but in a different way, and no one's a bad guy. We just have to act differently, as it were. And I also love this whole concept you brought up, Francesco, looking at sort of systems, but also reusing infrastructure that we have. And I actually wanted to take a different direction. We spoke a bit about sort of the infrastructure and reuse, and I wanted to bring up a different topic, which is more regarding sort of decarbonization and the proliferation of new digital platforms that have arisen over the last year or two. to help and support, going back to our very first topic of how corporates are sort of measuring, reporting, and building their targets. So we know there are many digital platforms that have sort of risen over the last year or so, are getting really big investments. We have sort of 20 million investments for Greenly, Watershed with another 70 million, evaluations of 1 billion. So we have a lot of digital platforms coming up to support corporates, companies, asset owners to track their emissions and set targets and even sort of help them with offsets. So Irena, I wanted to go back to you. And we spoke at the beginning that within Deloitte and a consultancy, you work with corporates on their accounting, their carbon footprint, helping them set their targets. How do you see the role of consultancy firms like your own compared to these digital platforms that are coming up? Can you live side by side? Perhaps you can just talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of confusion, and as you said, there are many new technology platforms, tech platforms that are coming out. I think that once or twice a week I'm meeting with entrepreneurs, with the startup companies that have developed some solutions in this area. I think that there is a lot of confusion going on within the corporates to understand what they should measure. So should they start from measuring what they report? Should they start from measuring what they want to achieve? So there's a lot of confusion, and every technology promises to solve the entire program. I think that the role of the consulting firms, and I'm not worried, because it will stay in really helping to set up a strategy on what to focus on, what to do, what to measure, and work together in collaboration with the tech solutions in order to help implement them in the organization, and especially make them relevant for the organization targets and KPIs, and also to the challenges of a specific industry. So as I see it, in the coming years, the technology will take a bigger place within the organizations, because most of them are now setting their goals, understanding what's in the whole ESG concept for them. And the next step for them is starting to measure it as they're doing for any operational area, for any financial investment. So it's the same, it's just not yet there.
Great. Wow. So I think we've really covered a lot of topics here, talking about sort of the power of numbers behind scales, behind the systems approach, seeing what corporates are doing to make themselves accountable. Perhaps we go over to any wrap-up words. I don't know whether anyone of the panel, whether you have any take-home message or call for action for our audience, or something regarding the power of numbers.
I do. So if there's any LP in the room, if there's someone who's got capital that can be moved, please talk to us. Yeah, I think capital shifting is the most important thing. Those of you in the room that have capital to deploy are in a super important position, because capital is what we need in order to enable these companies to scale up quickly and then to start decarbonizing. Yeah, remember the bell-shaped. Quickly up, super quickly down. Very limited time for action. So if you have cash and you don't know how to invest, talk to me. I'm not a cash person, but I'll convince you on a science basis that is the right way to channel the money you have, if you want to ensure that it's money with purpose and not just money that doesn't lead to anything really.
I have a bit of a more general call for action. If you are coming in maybe from a non-climate tech VC focus, and climate tech is new to you, I feel what is really important here, and what I see happening, and I think it's great, is that there is much more collaboration. We're not so much afraid of competing. We know there is a huge challenge that's facing all of us, and let's work together. let's collaborate, let's get that capital to those companies, let's help them scale. We can do our part to be part of the solution.
Very true. Extantia's methodology that we developed is public on our website. So that's a proof of, no moat. Let's share the knowledge we have. Let's ensure that we can accelerate, avoid reinventing the wheel, and get where we need to be as quickly as possible.
Okay, fantastic messages. And I actually also wanted to add something. We're sitting here and we're in a carbon panel and we're talking quantification and we're hearing from sort of the investment sides and where we should shift our capital. But I also wanted to mention something also around adaptation. Because, in adaptation, we have far less to do with quantifying the carbon impacts, and it takes me back to that sort of systems approach. And I think we ought to, as much as we can, quantify everything. So we need to quantify our water use. We need to quantify our land use. We need to quantify the impact on populations. And I think the same way as we have to look at a systems approach and timescales regarding the carbon mitigation, we need to have new and robust models. We spoke about sort of transparency for the carbon removal market, but also to come up with new multi-criteria analysis, rigid, robust models that we can also assess in the same way different adaptation technologies and techniques, and where is the best place over time and over systems to invest our money there. So I think quantifying also those aspects that are outside of carbon, but have a great impact for climate are obviously also very important. Great, I'd really like to thank fantastic panelists for a great conversation. Do you want to ask anything?
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so
Thanks
thanks
for having
very
us.
much for being with us.